and Ray Eubanks starting the concerts with the Jazz Arts Group over at Battelle. Well, first at Capitol and then over at Battelle. Obviously, Capitol and now OSU in the early 70s now have jazz programs. Was the jazz thing anywhere influencing you at that time?
No.
Through the middle of your career?
No, because the materials I used were, like I said, pretty American folk tradition oriented, and then I became acquainted with a folk singer, and that's where we clog danced and had dulcimers, and I had a huge folk program going on there, and which Gretchen continues to this day.
Right. And so while you're at Worthington, sort of toward the maybe 2/3 point in your career, you opened the Columbus Music Hall, which is in the old firehouse building on Parsons and Broad, sort of Parsons and Oak. Would that be?
84. So it's kind of late in my career. Yeah.
Late in your career. And so why was that a jazz thing you did, or was it just how did the music hall start?
Oh, well, that's too long to even.
Well, give me the
I married
reason.
a guy named John Ogden, and he always wanted a firehouse, and he bought the firehouse and paid cash for it, which I didn't know you could do. And then we struggled for the 4 years to turn it into something. And
was the original intent to be a venue for music?
No, we had no intent. The intent was for me to live there, and he called it Columbus Music Hall because he was a pilot, and CMH were the call letters at Port Columbus, and CMH was the Columbus Music Hall, CMH, and that's how remote.
Even before he had planned on doing music at the Columbus Music Hall?
Nobody planned on doing music at the Columbus Music Hall.
So what a curious name to name something if you're not even going to... So when did concerts start at the Music Hall?
One more accident in my life.
These are amazing accidents.
And we did weddings and parties, but then somebody, I don't know.
Was there a band that came to you and said, "Hey, like, why don't we perform here?
Well,
this is a great room."
Eventually Todd Stoll brought his
Jazz to Go.
Jazz to Go, and they did the Ellington Nutcracker. And Vaughn saw that and said, maybe my band could perform there. And that's what started the big band. And then that was my relationship to jazz musicians.
Did you know Ray Eubanks, JAG founder, before all of that?
Went to college. He's Tom Battenberg's age.
Right. But he was at Capitol. Well, he went to OSU. He started teaching at Capitol.
I was in school with him at OSU.
Interesting. And so even though you had all these sort of jazz pioneers in Columbus, you sort of stayed outside that fray for a long time.
Yeah, because I was a little old lady mother. Not little. I wasn't old then. But I was.
You've never been old.
And I ran a folk festival in Worthington for several years. I was really interested in Ohio traditional music and interviewing and working with rural music traditions.
Right.
And international too. So
right, which actually share a lot of common threads in terms of like really using your ears and really sort of grabbing hold of this music and being and to your initial point, music as sort of entertainment.
As entertainment, but it really accommodated I know 3 chords on the guitar.
You made the most out of what you had.
My functional guitar playing was very nice for traditional American music.
So you opened the music hall not as a music hall in 1988. 88. And you operated it as sort of just a venue for private events, and then...
and I had other people running it at that time.
Running it as an event space?
As an event space.
Okay.
I was in and out, and I lived there.
And you lived there?
I lived there. But,
there's a house adjacent to it. Did you live there or in the actual firehouse?
I lived upstairs in the music hall through all the construction.
Gotcha. And so at the time, how big of a project was it you must have thought, like, why do you want to own a firehouse?
I just became part of the project.
Yeah.
By marriage.
The awesome thing about that, and I was really lucky that I came to Columbus in 2006 to start college, and that was the last sort of like 2 or 3 years of the music hall. So I got to see Vaughn's band there, a bunch of small group jazz there. And to me, there hasn't been a venue as good or like it since in terms of the acoustics and the feel, the atmosphere inside of the space. So you started doing jazz, and Vaughn's band started, I guess, in the mid to late 90s?
They were there for 12 years, and I don't know when that
So that would go back into the, I think, early 90s, if I recall. And then so at that time, you're starting to get around a little bit more jazz music. Did Yumbambe was a salsa band
when I got a liquor license in Yumbambe, Eric decided, he did every Tuesday night there once we had the liquor license, and that was really fun. That worked really well.
And they had a weekly sort of residency there. And so you said that the first 4 or 5 years were tough because it's like, what are we going to do with the space and getting it off the ground?
Well, we did the weddings and parties until finally one summer I decided I could not face one more wedding,
right,
one more bride. So that was when I started thinking about selling it. And then the next accident was my grandson Andrew said, "Hey, Grandma, let's just make it a jazz club." And I went, "Okay."
So
last 5 years, we pretty much stopped doing weddings, and we shot ourselves in the foot several times by trying to have a jazz club.
And you had a lot of jazz musicians' weddings at the Firehouse.
Right.
I know Mark Donovan.
Mark Donovan
was one that had his
Ryan
there.
Hamilton.
Ryan Hamilton.
Rob McAbee's first wedding.
So that was actually, it's kind of a lot of happy accidents here at the Columbus Music Hall. And so, what was the first turning point at the music hall where you felt like, okay, like this thing is worth doing? I mean, you said the first few years were a struggle. Was there a turning point where it was like, okay, this is all right?
Well, yeah, presenting was great, and but because it's jazz, it's always hard.
Right.
So
because
then there was Mark Morton put his American School of Double Bass. He was principal bass with the Columbus Symphony Orchestra, and he started the American School of Double Bass with kind of his partner Charlie Rath, who was very involved with
Wendy's.
He was the marketing director of Wendy's.
He designed Where's the Beef.
But when he retired from Wendy's, he came to the office with me he retired to the music hall, and he had been on the board and maybe president of the board of Jazz Arts Group. So he started presenting jazz, and that was the real hardcore jazz when he started doing a series with Mark Flugie.
Called Firehouse Jazz, right?
I don't know what they called it.
Yeah,
but that was he was the one that brought in really great outside artists and found the money and did the presenting, and under Mark's directorship then.
When you had the music hall, did you know that you had sort of a special room? Did it feel, were people telling you that it sounded great, that it felt great?
We had no idea. That was an accident. And the piano's really the link.
Yeah.
The old Mason Hamlin piano that's at my home now was the reason that music could happen there.
Right.
So.
Right. And so the whole time you had the Firehouse, which was from 88 to 2008, 20 years, 21 years, you're teaching for like at least half of that time. At least the first several years of that time, right? Full time still.
I taught till 1993, I think, is when I really retired from the first round of teaching.
Right, and so that is a great segue because you retired in 1993, with your normal state teacher's retirement, which was like fairly like right at the beginning of your retirement age, right?
Well, I was really young because I started teaching so early. So I was young,
yeah. But then the next year, you got into teaching a little bit with Capital University, doing some education methods.
I did methods courses at Capital. I would fill in for people, and then I did the OSU Marion for maybe 10 years or so.
And then you got into a little bit of higher ed. Did you take... Looks like you maybe took some time off before you got back into the classroom to teach. Did you?
Well, during my teaching career in Worthington, I took did a sabbatical for a year to work on my PhD, which I didn't finish. I did everything, all but dissertation. So I taught that year. I was a TA at Ohio State, and that kind of started my college elementary education, elementary music teaching chops.
Yep. And then pretty quickly you get into sort of in post-retirement, if you could call it that, back into teaching through sort of the Montessori schools and things like that.
Right.
So you really didn't take any time off. You didn't skip an academic year.
I did, I think, because I ran the music hall for a little while.
Okay.
And then that's where the PBJ started.
Right. So PBJ and Jazz started actually at the Firehouse. That was
Right.
your own creation. Mm-hmm. How did that come to be?
Because prior to jazz, I presented a lot of bluegrass and traditional Indian music and folk singers, Bill Staines, people like that. And I thought, well, if they were going to do an evening concert, why couldn't they do a 6 o'clock concert for kids and families? And that's kind of dinner time. So that's how the PBJ and concerts, whatever they were.
Right.
PBJ concerts got started because the kids needed a snack. And then as traffic patterns changed in Columbus, 6 o'clock became a really hard time. And as the jazz started up at the music hall, then I started Saturday morning PBJs.
Right.
And that was how that...
And so you started doing these family concerts. Was that in part made possible because you understood, going all the way back to the bomb scares, how to entertain not just adults and how to sort of fuse this American folk music or even international folk music and then jazz into, was there a certain thing where you were like, we need to entertain the kids?
Well, I just
and
thought
fuse
they
it
needed
together.
a connection to hear live music of all kinds.
Right.
And that's still, I'm the connector. I think that's my role now, is to connect musicians with kids. And sometimes you write materials. I did that for the symphony forever. I've been writing their curriculum materials for their kiddie concerts. But the importance of a family being able to bring children to hear live music was rare in Columbus at that time.
And so you had kind of a unique perspective, being a venue owner and a career educator, to make that happen.
Right.
And it seems like a lot of people instigating you into trying things. Seems like so far.
So far.
But you mentioned something that was another important thing. So you started writing curriculum for arts organizations. First, the symphony.
For the symphony, I wrote with Tim Gerber. He was at Ohio State. He was a first-year professor at the same time I was doing my sabbatical, and we just connected. Mm-hmm. And we were both on the Symphony Education Committee with Al Berry and other people. But anyway, he was the one that instigated the writing this curriculum for docents to take out materials that they could really use, that they didn't have to know how to be a teacher or about the symphonic material. But we did a booklet, so the JAG booklet now is...
Right, so then Ray Eubanks came to you and asked you to do the same thing essentially for the Columbus Jazz Orchestra.
Right.
And I think that would have been the early 2000s that we started doing the All That Jazz concert.
So I wrote that pre-concert curriculum for teachers to use, so that because they're kids, if the kids are familiar with what they are going to hear at a concert, they're more likely to enjoy it.
Yep. And do you feel that it also helps the teachers teach the content by coming to the concert and seeing it tied together with a booklet? Does it deepen the way that a teacher can deliver on the
they're
curriculum?
Probably in the same predicament that I am in. They're more church-oriented musicians, classical musicians. Elementary teachers are not typically jazz musicians.
Right.
So their vocabulary for jazz is probably limited, and you've got to make it quick and clear and fast for them. They need to be able to teach from that book without studying anything.
Right.
They just be able, that's the goal, is that the materials are so simple that they can
So then sort of taking that point and looking at your whole career overall, seems like that was sort of something that you got early on as a kid, that sense of how do we make this not just palatable but usable? Like, how can I give you information that matters instead of sort of...
Yeah, well, to make it accessible.
Yeah. Yep. And then, so how did you feel like? So you put a full career in teaching in every day for the whole school year. How did you feel like teaching elementary music changed, maybe from beginning to end? Was there anything that was a big evolution?
The socially incorrect events needed to be discontinued. Halloween, Christmas. When I was still at Colonial Hills, I stopped doing anything that referred to Christmas because that was culturally incorrect. But it was, at that time, it was as culturally incorrect to not do Christmas.
Right. So you were caught in the crossfire.
I was caught in the middle, but I stopped doing Christmas programs quite a while before I stopped teaching.
What about teaching itself? Was there anything that changed in what you had to deliver as you went through your career there? Because